Is thrown, Fields avoiding the pressure, taken off,
right here.
Right on cue, Justin Fields to the end zone, will check the flag.
Between the two leaders is allowed left. Oh, the 24 is spinning. The 24's, oh, there's a multiple cars into the wall here. There must be oil or some kind of fluid down on the racetrack right there in turn. We got more cars coming in.
William Byron is reporting that the curb came up. He hit the curb in the 24.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 66 of Sports Speak. I'm Eddie Kalegi, going solo today. Tim Moore is unavailable. He'll be back next week, but we still have a lot to dive into in the world of sports. We'll be starting with some NASCAR. As you saw in the highlights beforehand, there was a lot that went down at the Indianapolis Road Course. We'll also be talking a little MLB and some NFL as the NFL Preseason got underway. But I'm going to start a little with NASCAR, who really can't be that happy as an organization at this point, because the Indianapolis Road Course, the final new track really on the schedule this year, there were like 5 or 6 that debuted in the Cup Series that had never been there or hadn't been there in many, many years. The Indianapolis Road Course, of course, replacing the Brickyard 400, which was considered a crown jewel event, but had lost its prestige over the past few years, had a couple of really bad races that were boring or too many wrecks, or the bad race with the tires back in 2008, everybody blowing tires, and that was really an embarrassment and a stain on NASCAR. So they decided, just for a little more action and going with the theme of transitioning to road courses here until the next gen car is ready, and maybe even while the next gen car is ready, but at least for right now, wanting the road courses, they switched to the Indy Road Course. They've seen that the Charlotte Roval has been in a solid track. The Daytona Road Course, they've now had 2 Cup races at, neither of which have really caused issue. And until there were 10 laps to go, there was really no problem with the Indianapolis Road Course. Now, flashback to the Xfinity race the day before. There were some issues with a curb in turn 6, an orange curb that had a little bit of a leap to it. And on the first lap, a few drivers went wide and hit that curb and suffered collateral damage, and 4 cars had to retire from the race because of damage because they hit that curb and went up in the air. NASCAR decided they would remove that curb, but remember that the Indianapolis Road Course has never been used by stock cars until last year, and had never been used for 2 races. It was just the Xfinity Series last time. It had predominantly been used by Indy cars, F1, and motorcycles. And in all of those instances, those cars aren't nearly as heavy as these metal stock cars. So as the race went on, and of course, NASCARs don't really abide by track limits, and they always try to use these curbs as much as possible. As the race went on, these curbs started to get more and more progressively damaged. And with about 10 to go, a caution comes out. There's debris on the track. So they have a restart. Kyle Larson was running away with the race. They come back together. Off the restart, Martin Truex Jr. clips the curb a little bit. You see some stuff come up, and he spins out, hits the wall. NASCAR does not throw the caution despite Truex's car being littered in the wall. He was able to drive away, but there's tons of debris on the track in turn 6, which at first glance, since it happened so quickly, we assumed it was just sheet metal and parts coming off of Truex's car because he got clobbered. But after looking back, we realized that that's actually part of the curb, which had been destroyed by that 19 car, because the next time they came around, that hilarious wreck that we played at the beginning occurred. And we saw so many good cars. Kyle Busch, Joey Logano. Joey Logano had a huge hit. William Byron, who was having his best ever run at a road course. Daniel Suarez, Ryan Preece, Christopher Bell, Justin Haley, Kevin Harvick, James Davison, all taken out in one big wreck. It was probably the most embarrassing wreck we've ever seen in 75 years of NASCAR. And there have been some pretty bad moments in stock car racing in the past. But I don't think there's anything that could ever come close to what we saw right there. The track breaks. Everybody ends up with damage aside from maybe the top 3. Everybody else just goes flying into the wall. Joey Logano, good to see he was okay, because that was a massive hit. And think about the rough year Logano has had. Daytona ends up in a massive accident, getting wrecked from the lead. Talladega ends up on his lid, and now ends up in the barriers here at the Indy Road Course. And we haven't even made it to the playoffs yet. So he's had some misfortune, to say the least. But that was not good looking at all for NASCAR. that they did not throw the caution and try to repair that curb when the curb had been torn up the lap before. And you end up with so many good cars taken out. And what do? They decide to remove that curb entirely. So what happens next restart? There's still another curb there that they did not take out, that Chris Wright had launched himself off of in the Xfinity race. And what happens? Michael McDowell hits that, goes flying. About 4 more cars get torn up, including both Austin Dillon and Tyler Reddick, who are battling for the final playoff spot. You end up with a caution again. Then you get to the whole mess at the end, which I'm not even going to get to yet with AJ Allmendinger winning. But this is not good for NASCAR, because every single one of these tracks, and there are so many fans, especially the traditionalists that are, very pro mile and a half, pro short track. Not going to say that I'm on that side necessarily, but didn't like the gimmicks that we saw entering the 2021 season. Replacing the Bristol Day race with a dirt race where the dirt couldn't really hold together. We basically had a dust storm on the track on the first day where drivers couldn't see. Then it rained. It became a mud bath, which then turned into a bloodbath with cars crashing everywhere in both the truck race and the Cup race, that they had to revert to single file restarts, which we haven't seen in NASCAR in 15 years because the cars couldn't run side by side. We excuse that. I mean, I personally excuse that on this very show because I knew it was the first time they ever raced there. And it's the first time NASCAR has put Cup cars on dirt in almost 50 years. But let's fast forward a little bit to some of these other races where NASCAR's officiating has been a mess this season, predominantly at new courses. Circuit of the Americas. Heavy rain. They decide to keep racing. Martin Truex Jr. and Cole Custer have a horrific collision because of the rain, because the windshield wipers weren't working. The rain was too heavy. The cars couldn't grip. Then you have Kurt Busch, who basically ends up just going across. He was hydroplaning. Got very lucky he didn't hit Kyle Busch or Austin Dillon. Then they eventually called the race. So despite that being a great fan experience, going to COTA, going to Texas again, that's where a lot of NASCAR's base is. That's good for the sport in a sense. That race didn't go particularly well. Then New Hampshire, which is an established track, NASCAR sends the drivers out in the rain, and 3 of the 4 Joe Gibbs racing cars end up in the wall, Kyle Busch with terminal damage 4 laps into the race. And then now with the Indianapolis Road Course with this curb, probably the worst of all. Only thing I can potentially compare it to was when the cable broke at Charlotte about 8 or 9 years ago in the Coke 600 that was carrying the overhead camera that was flying around, and the cable came down and hit a couple of cars, Kyle Busch, Marcus Ambrose. But that you blame on Fox. You can't necessarily blame that on NASCAR. This you have to blame on NASCAR, Roger Penske, and the Indianapolis track workers. And I know there was no precedent set. It's similar to the Bristol dirt race because you didn't know what to expect putting stock cars there. And you didn't expect the curb to break. But when you saw it break the lap before, Martin Truex Jr. and all this stuff shooting everywhere, we couldn't see it as fans in the split second we saw it on the TV view. But any official there in turn 5, turn 6 had to see that the curb was suddenly sticking up like a ramp. Like, it's not a good situation whatsoever for NASCAR. And a lot of fans are very frustrated with what happened there. But thankfully for NASCAR, they got a very popular winner. Because with 2 laps to go, Kyle Larson got knocked around. Then Chase Briscoe, who was fast all day, slides through the grass in front of Denny Hamlin, gets called for a course penalty. Is told that he's going to have to do a stop and go. Doesn't do it. Then spins out Denny Hamlin. Then Briscoe's penalized and parked. And AJ Allmendinger comes through to win a race, his first Cup win in 7 years, and the first ever win for Kalegi Racing. We're one of the best, little teams, rising stories that done well in the Xfinity Series. Going to have a Cup team next year, full time. Good for them. Good for Allmendinger, who's battled a lot of adversity throughout his career, including losing probably his best ride at Penske in 2012 because of the drug situation. But that kind of alleviates some of the pain that some of the NASCAR fans feel who were not happy. But this can't keep happening. You have to give them a slight benefit of the doubt because it's the first year they're on all these road courses. It's the first year you raced on dirt at Bristol, but things have to change when you head into next year. And I know we haven't had the schedule released yet. That's going to be coming very soon. But the assumption is that a lot of these tracks are still going to be returning no matter what type of car they're running. And no matter what type of car they're running, you've raced stock cars on them once, fix the mistakes you previously made, and don't let that happen again. Now, there are a lot of NASCAR fans who don't want to see 7 road courses on the schedule. I like seeing road courses on the schedule. I think it provides a better brand of racing. Personally, I prefer road courses way over having tons and tons and tons of mile and a halves. That being said, if the cars can't handle the road racing, if NASCAR can't be consistent with racing in the rain, with other sort of penalties, if they're throwing in stages in road racing, which throws off the pit strategy, which is a whole other problem, you have to be able, if you're going to be racing this many road courses, you have to cater the NASCAR package and the NASCAR rules to fit those types of tracks. And that's really basically what has to be done here. You assume they're going to have these road courses back. The Indianapolis Road Course, if there was not that caution with 10 laps to go, Kyle Larson would have won. Some people would have complained that it was a boring race and not much better than the Brickyard 400, but there wouldn't have been any controversy. But you wonder in those final 10 laps if that curb still would have ended up breaking because it was clearly on its breaking point. It's not like Martin Truex Jr. hit it so hard. It was slowly falling apart. And Truex's hit to it was the icing on the cake. And then it just exploded, and then everybody else hit it the next lap. But you know what? AJ Allmendinger wins. Good for him. They are back on an oval. There's only one more road course, is the Charlotte Roval, which has been pretty good in NASCAR these past couple of years. That's in the playoffs, but they head to Michigan next. Should be an interesting race. Chevy is usually very fast at Michigan. And you have both Tyler Reddick and Austin Dillon battling for that final playoff spot. They both got wrecked in the second big one at Indy, so didn't get much separation between the two of them. Denny Hamlin is now locked into the playoffs. Kevin Harvick is still not locked in, but Ford has also had a lot of success, as has Penske. So don't count out Matt DiBenedetto either. He was up front towards the end at Indy, but just had some damage and wasn't really able to keep up and made a slip up heading into turn 1. I'd watch out for him. 2 races left before the postseason, Michigan and Daytona. Really excited to watch them both. But let's shift gears now to Major League Baseball. And of course, behind me, as always, I've got the Citi Field mural, where things aren't particularly good right now for the New York Mets. But it's not like we couldn't have expected this to come. 5 consecutive losses for the New York Mets. 3 against the Dodgers, 2 against the Giants. They have 8 more against those NL West powerhouses coming up. So they're not going to be spared. But it seems like this season is slipping away. Javier Baez is out. Still no timetable on Francisco Lindor. Still no timetable on Jacob deGrom, Jacob deGrom, of course, is their best pitcher. Francisco Lindor, I know he hasn't performed very well, but look at the season splits, both with him and both with his career in Cleveland. But especially this year, even though he hasn't been playing particularly well offensively, he's played stellar defense, and the team is much better with him on the field because he motivates the other players being out there. And it's kind of a lost cause at this point for the Mets. They've fallen 4.5 out. The Braves, I thought the Braves were done for when Ronald Acuna Jr. went down. But they've shown a lot of resiliency. Their pitching staff is doing very well despite not having Mike Soroka either. Ozzie Albies, Freddie Freeman, both playing out of their mind right now. And the Phillies, they're wavering at 500 like they always do, but 500 might be enough to cut it in the NL East. That being said, I've said it before, I'll say it again. There's no way an NL East team this year goes anywhere past the NLDS. The Milwaukee Brewers are too good. All 3 teams from the West, the Dodgers, Giants, and the Padres, who suddenly now might not even make the playoffs and still have 3 series against the Dodgers and 3 series against the Giants before the end of the season. They might not even make the playoffs, which would be stunning and heartbreaking for the Padres, who have made so many moves. And it kind of reminds you of AJ Preller a few years ago when he did something similar and it didn't end up paying off. That they brought in all those players, they brought in the Uptons and everything, and Fred Kimbrell, and They couldn't make the playoffs and were still outplayed by the Dodgers and Giants. And we're seeing that again. But for the NL East, for the New York Mets especially, and I think even the Phillies as well, you got to start looking towards 2022. Because a lot of these teams in the National League, I don't see them necessarily sustaining into next season as dominant as they are. San Francisco Giants, I mean, when Tim and Raheel were both here about a month ago, we all agreed we thought the Giants were going to fall apart. It's miraculous that they're playing this well. Now, having Chris Bryant is a boost. The fact that Buster Posey at 34 years old is playing like an MVP is a major boost. The fact that Evan Longoria is now healthy is also a major boost. All of that said, I did not think this would be where they were. I still don't see this continuing next year because the Giants have a very old roster. Posey, Crawford, Longoria, Belt. It's the same names that have been there since 10 years ago. And they kind of went shot in the dark with their pitching rotation with some guys who had really struggled in other places. Kevin Gausman, Anthony DeSclafani. We're kind of luckily having good years right now. And it's a little bit of a fluke. And we've seen the Giants have fluke years before. They won the World Series 3 times in 5 years, twice as a wild card team. But I just don't see that sustaining. The Milwaukee Brewers, their pitching staff is electric. Their offense, I don't know how long that can sustain past this year. Christian Yelich has never really been the same since he won his MVP. Lorenzo Cain is getting up there in age. Keston Hiura has just never panned out to be what so many people had hyped him up to be. And beyond that, there isn't much to write home about the Milwaukee Brewers offense. Their pitching staff with Burns, with Woodruff, with Peralta, those guys are all great. But I don't know how long they're going to sustain. We know the Cubs are in a rebuild. The Pirates are still in a rebuild. The Cardinals are treading water at this point. To me, they're sort of in a rebuild as well. The Cincinnati Reds are still a good team. But for the NL East, I say focus everything towards 2022 because there's no way that an NL East team is getting past the Los Angeles Dodgers in a series. Or I think even the San Francisco Giants or the Milwaukee Brewers this year. But especially the Dodgers. Next thing I want to talk about is the AL East because it has gotten very interesting now. The Yankees, despite missing everybody, no Severino, no Gary Sanchez. Clint Frazier might not even be able to play again. That was a blockbuster story because of his vision issues. Corey Kluber is out. Gio Urshela is out. Anthony Rizzo, Garrett Cole. And they've still managed to now catch the Red Sox, who at one point were 9 games ahead of them this season. And they swept a doubleheader from them on Tuesday. 2 fantastic wins. Luis Gil is the first player in Major League history 3 scoreless starts to start his career. Yankees have found something with this kid. That first start was not a fluke. And now, even though they don't have Anthony Rizzo, who I'd argue is a bigger pickup than Joey Gallo has been carrying his weight very well in Rizzo's absence. Giancarlo Stanton has had a very underrated, really good year. He's stayed healthy. He hasn't hit, tons and tons of power, but he's gotten the job done. And he's been out there each and every day. And that's exactly what the Yankees needed. Aaron Judge, too, has stayed remarkably healthy all season long. All of that said, Yankees are playing really well. But I still don't see them catching the Tampa Bay Rays. The Rays just have too much depth. They have so much young talent. They actually added at the deadline for once. They brought in Nelson Cruz, who's playing really well. It's remarkable that Cruz is 41 years old, tied for the oldest player in the league with Rich Hill, and still hitting just as well as he did 10 years ago when he was with the Texas Rangers. He's truly an ageless wonder no matter where he plays. But I don't see the Yankees catching the Rays. And as Tim has said on this show in the past, and I have to agree with him on this, I don't see the Yankees getting past the Tampa Bay Rays in a playoff series. The Yankees are not a team that perform well in the postseason. And it's been this way for almost a decade. Once they get to the playoffs, the Yankees tend to play down to their opponents, their bullpen gets frazzled, and their offense gets inconsistent. And this is a year-by-year trend. There are 2 teams in the American League. Well, one that is very similar to the Yankees, and that is the Oakland Athletics, where they'll win 90 games in the regular season, then get blown away in a series in 3 games, or end up in the wild card game and just have no chance against the opposing team. But aside on the other side, in contrast to the Yankees and the A's, there are two teams in the American League who are the polar opposite, who play much better in the postseason than they did in the regular season. Well, one does the same in the postseason as they do in the regular season. That's the Tampa Bay Rays. That's a couple years in a row now, where they stay true to who they are. They stay consistent. That's how we saw them get to the World Series and force a Game 6 against an immensely talented Dodgers team last year. Then the other is the Houston Astros, who even if they struggle during the regular season, even if they have injuries, they battle through in the postseason. Doesn't matter if AJ Hinch is the manager. Doesn't matter if it's Dusty Baker. Let's not forget with Dusty Baker last year, the Astros were below 500 and ended up a win away from going to the World Series. So I don't see the Yankees stopping either of those teams. And in the past 4 years, those two teams have stopped the Yankees 3 times in the playoffs. The Rays last year, Astros in 19, Astros in 17. So I still think that's the situation, but the Yankees are definitely outplaying the Red Sox. We said it that the Red Sox and the Giants would be the two teams that would especially take a step back after the deadline. After the All-Star break. The Giants haven't yet. Still think there's a chance that they're going to come back to earth a little bit before the postseason. But the Boston Red Sox have absolutely done so. They're still a good team. It's clear that last year hurt them, especially because of injuries and because they didn't have Alex Cora. Having Alex Cora back, I think, is really good for this team. He's a well-liked manager, despite all the drama surrounding him in 2017 and 2018 with sign stealing. Also being a younger manager who played very recently in the major leagues, I think caters well to a Red Sox team that is very youthful. And even though they added Chris Sale, getting him back from Tommy John, even though Kyle Schwarber is coming back and he's having the best year of his career, I just don't think it's enough for Boston to keep pace with the Yankees or the Rays. And for Toronto, I still think that this team is about a year away. And I know I said that last year too, but there's really not that much urgency right now with the Toronto Blue Jays. They just finally got back into their home ballpark 2 weeks ago, for crying out loud. It's been so difficult for this team. They haven't gotten to play in the Rogers Center for almost 2 years, and they finally do now. But I don't think the Toronto Blue Jays are necessarily there just yet. If you're a Blue Jays fan, don't fret. Still got Vladdy, still got Bo, still got Kevin Biggio, Teoscar Hernandez, Lourdes Gurriel Jr. I mean, there's tons of young talent on this team that isn't going anywhere. George Springer's in the first year of his contract and has been hurt. And now we've seen what the torrent that he's been on after the All-Star break. So I wouldn't be worried if I'm the Blue Jays. I just don't think this is their year. The Yankees could come back to the pack eventually next year, the Rays as well. But for this year, I think it's still between Tampa and the Yankees. But we only have a few more weeks left in the season. The AL wildcard race has gotten spicy. It's a 3-way tie right now. Yankees, A's, Red Sox. Yankees and A's are only ahead of the Red Sox by mere percentage points right now for the 2 wildcard spots. That battle, I think, is going to go down to the final couple days of the season, as is the NL East between the Phillies and Braves and the Mets if they can somehow get back into there. And the NL West could be very interesting as well in the wild card race. The fact that the Dodgers are so electric, could end up winning nearly 100 games and still have to go to a 1-game playoff is amazing. And it's a testament to how well the Giants have played. And the fact that the Padres could realistically go 90-72, finish 3rd in the NL West and miss the playoffs because the Reds beat them by like a game for the 2nd wild card. It's insane, but that's how the system works. And the Padres just haven't been able to capitalize in getting past the Dodgers or Giants this season. They played well in head-to-head against the Dodgers, not so much against San Francisco, but it'll be interesting to see how that pans out. But final phase of this episode, NFL preseason got started. Not just talking about the Hall of Fame game a week and a half ago. We actually had a full week. All the new quarterbacks debuted. And I want to just go through 3 takeaways that I had from NFL preseason week 1. Hard to make many big ones because there are so many teams that are just sitting their starters or they only played 1 series. The Chargers, for example, said Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry. They're 4 big offensive studs, not playing a single snap this preseason, which I don't think is necessarily a bad decision because Justin Herbert as a rookie last year fit in perfectly with all 3 of those guys. Other than having a new coach, there's not much new for them to sink into. And there's really no benefit to risking getting them hurt, especially Henry or Eckler, who have a pretty significant injury history. But let's talk about a couple of these takeaways. I'd say overall, all of the rookie quarterbacks that were drafted in the first round this year were impressive in different ways. But I'd say the most impressive performance belongs to Justin Fields. He was ranked as he had the third fastest sprint speed of any player in preseason week 1 on a play. And I know not all the regulars are playing. That's above any receivers, running backs. Third fastest sprint speed, I can't even talk, in the entire league. He also completed tons of passes, went 14 for 20, played a good portion of the game, was responsible for a pair of touchdowns, was productive, was able to dump some passes off, was able to throw deep. I know Trey Lance looked good. I know Mac Jones finally earning that quarterback number, going from number 50 to number 10 in Belichick's system, was solid. Zach Wilson and Trevor Lawrence did about what they were expected to do. But I don't think anybody can put anything past Justin Fields. And I know he's not going to be the starting week 1. That's just not in the plan for the Chicago Bears. But it's hard to see a situation where Justin Fields is not the starting quarterback for the Chicago Bears by November 1st. Like, I don't see how they don't turn to him by then, especially if the Bears are playing decently well, like last year. But it seems like they're just a quarterback away because offensively, they can't get anything done. That was the case last year with Mitchell Trubisky. Remember, the Bears started last season 5-1. And they were winning close, low-scoring games. Then they started playing some high-power offenses. Khalil Mack struggled. The rest of the Bears defense couldn't hold them in check. And Mitchell Trubisky wasn't doing anything for that offense. They still made the playoffs, and then their offense was silenced in the postseason game. But there's still work to be done for the Chicago Bears. But if they're in contention, especially we don't know what to expect with the Packers this year. We can expect the Lions to be pretty bad. And the Vikings, I think, are a 500 team. If the Bears are in contention for the division halfway through the season, and Andy Dalton isn't giving them much at quarterback, there's no reason to continue to sit Justin Fields. And he had the most impressive performance of any quarterback in preseason week 1. Any rookie quarterback. My second takeaway is this. The media overhype of Trevor Lawrence is real. Trevor Lawrence had about the same stat line of Zach Wilson. They both went 6 for 9. But Trevor Lawrence had a turnover, was also sacked 2 more times than Zach Wilson. Not saying it was a bad game for Trevor Lawrence by any standards. It's first time on an NFL field. First time with Urban Meyer coaching an NFL game. But it still wasn't great. And it was the same as Zach Wilson. And if you see some of the headlines, I saw a very telling tweet where it was 2 separate tweets, I believe from Pro Football Talk. One of them was about how Zach Wilson was a bit disappointing and unimpressive in his debut, yet Trevor Lawrence impressed in his Jaguars debut. They were both 6 for 9, and Lawrence had a turnover, and Lawrence got sacked twice. We know the media really buys into Trevor Lawrence, and hopefully he can go out there in his rookie year and ball, make the Jaguars a competent, competitive team, prove why he was the number 1 pick, and really prove the doubters like me wrong. And I don't think Trevor Lawrence is going to be a bad quarterback. I think he's a fine quarterback and could be a franchise QB for the Jacksonville Jaguars. But I don't think he's automatically just going to be the best quarterback from this draft. Let's not forget how a couple years ago, Baker Mayfield was hyped up like crazy, that he was going to be the best quarterback from that draft by far. And he's proven it. He's taken the Browns to playoff games. He's made that team better. But there is no way in heck that he is the best quarterback from that draft. The best quarterback from that draft is the man from Wyoming that nobody really knew about, but the Buffalo Bills took a chance on, and that was Josh Allen. I could see something very similar happening this year, where either Justin Fields has a Lamar Jackson-esque entry into the league as a mobile QB, or that Trey Lance or Zach Wilson, both of them not really notable in the college football world until draft time, kind of turn heads. You do not have to play for an SEC or an ACC school to become one of the best quarterbacks in the league. We've seen it time and time again. Jimmy Garoppolo, Tony Romo, Ben Roethlisberger, all coming from smaller schools. They did not get the national stage. They did not get all the press when they were in college for 4 years, yet they did their job, faltered a little bit in the draft because of it, but then entered the NFL and took care of business. Trevor Lawrence is going to be a great quarterback, but the media shouldn't just automatically be assuming that he's going to be the best one from this draft. You got to give some credit to guys like Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, who have a serious upside despite being risky draft moves. And my final thing is this. The NFL does not need to have 3 preseason games. They definitely didn't need to have 4. Of course, they've consolidated now that they added the extra week to the season. I really feel like they only need 1 preseason game. And before anybody comes after me for this, think about how much work they're doing with other teams. Think about how many times you'll turn on the news, NFL Network, ESPN, you'll hear about these teams that are training together, that are spending the entire week working out together. Eagles and Patriots are doing it right now. Giants and Browns are doing it right now. That kind of alleviates the need for preseason games because you're still getting all the same workouts. You're still getting scrimmages in. You're still getting battles in. You don't need to have this many official preseason games. Because especially when you get to the 3rd or the 4th in the past preseason games, the roster decisions are typically made. That last preseason game is so weird because you have players that are definitely on the roster but aren't really going to be actual factors during the season that are on the field. Because teams are not going to want to risk getting their star players hurt in that last game of the preseason. But by the 4th week of the preseason, and I still think that'll be the case for the 3rd week in just 2 weeks' time this year in the NFL, coaches have made the decisions. They've made the necessary cuts. Maybe there's still 1 or 2 questions that they're trying to sort out, but those games don't really mean much. And the preseason, of course, does not get that much draw. The Hall of Fame game tends to, because football fans are so excited. It's the first time in more than 6 months that you've seen the sport going on. Unlike the other 3 major sports that have about 4 months of off season, football, it's a full 6. And for certain teams, that first preseason game, if they didn't make the playoffs the year before, it's been nearly 8 months since fans saw their team on the field. You can get that from 1 preseason game. You don't need 4. You don't need 3. I think 1 preseason game and more scrimmages between these teams coming together, working out together, practicing together, I think that could be better. And I also think what they could do is add in 1 more week to the NFL season. Having it right now that some teams get 9 home games and others get 8 is completely unfair. You're taking away home field advantage. Well, you still have home field advantage, and it's just unfair to the teams that don't get as many home games. Having to play more games on the road, I mean, there's no other sport like that. So what I think is key is to add in, I say if you got it down to 1 preseason game, you add in 1 more game, 2 more weeks to the NFL season. You start the season off, even if you kept, maybe if you even started it last week of August. We saw the NBA start their season a couple of weeks earlier, and it's paid off in a big way for them. I think if you started the season a little earlier, you add in 2 more weeks. So it's actually a 20-week season. Teams play 18 games, they get 2 bye weeks. I think that would be good, and I think the players would potentially agree to it if they consolidated the preseason and cut it down to just 1 game. And you could spend another week having a group workout with other teams. Maybe you even bring 2 or 3 or 4 teams together to work together and have scrimmages against each other. Teams that you're not going to end up playing during the season. But I think that's the best solution because I really don't think you need that many preseason games. But I'm going to cap off that show here. Just wanted to get to that, get some news and notes in about the MLB and NASCAR as well. We'll have Tim Moore back. We'll get a guest on next week. But we hope you enjoyed episode 66 of Sports Speak. Remember to follow us on Twitter at Sports Speak Live. Until next time, this is Eddie Kalegi signing off. We hope you have a great rest of your week.